So obviously we'll have to cut it from here. But yeah, it's setting it up. And I'll just do like a brief intro.
Okay.
There it is. And it's going. Probably should I'm gonna go ahead and mute that. So hopefully it's just muted for me. If anybody happens to watch this, or rather, I guess I should start it this way. We're streaming live on YouTube, but for the recording, this is the Clarify Your Value podcast. I'm Brian Fretwell. For those that follow me on YouTube or any of the other socials, we went live on YouTube today, quite frankly, because we couldn't figure out how to go live on Instagram. And we haven't done the podcast in a couple of weeks, partly because of my sort of failure to set things up and to set up some guests. But the idea was that we would do a live podcast where guests could call in. So if you are watching this live, I'm wondering if I can comment it yeah, I should be able to put it in the chat. So if you happen to randomly be, in YouTube and you find this and you want to jump on and have a chat with us, feel free to go in there. I just put the link in the comment. But Ren, yeah, hey, here we are. So the just to give everybody an outline, the purpose of this podcast is twofold. One is the call-in portion where we chat with people using techniques designed around the science of connection to help them get clarity on different things, but to show how that is not necessarily coaching or leading somebody or answering. Like there's this difference between trying to help somebody and trying to connect with somebody. And one of the big purposes of the podcast is to help people see that distinction so that we can help people with clarity, help them solve problems without moving into the role of like the coach or the counselor, or quite frankly, things that are inappropriate when you're in a relationship. But also for coaches and leaders, how they can move into the connection role and it then amplifies their coaching and their leadership. Which leads us to what we decided to talk about today, right, Ren, which is the relationship between connection and clarity. And I think a big part of, just starting a podcast, but most importantly, the bigger part of what we're doing at Finding Good with Finding Blueberries and the connector types and all of this is really changing how people think about connection. Because I very much believe that, like, how we have been conditioned to think about connection and to some degree create connection with others doesn't really fit our current environment. And given how like drastically disconnected we are as a society, the tools for recreating the connection we need just quite frankly need to be better. And so that's what I spend all my days on, is figuring out what makes these better. And one of the ways of looking at this was this idea of the difference between intellectual clarity and relational clarity, which I figured we could chat about today. And if people jump on, we can have a chat with the people that jump on. But if not, I think just the idea of talking about intellectual clarity versus relational clarity, yeah, it's pretty important. So yeah, Ren, I figure we have more of a conversation, or you can just pepper me with questions. But you're really good at helping people, or setting the conversation up with like, here's why people need it, where I tend to jump into like assuming that people need this. But yeah, so with that and the idea of like intellectual clarity versus relational clarity, like from your standpoint, either why does it matter, or maybe even what questions do you have right at the gate that would help people understand why it matters, right?
Yeah. I guess for me, like it matters because clarity typically lies beyond what we're willing to investigate.
Mm,
And I know as a leader, I have asked people to do things and I thought I was very clear. And then they come back
yeah.
3 days later, like, wait a minute, that's not what we talked about.
Yeah.
Um, and like also having been someone who's taken direction in that way and come back investing a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of heart, only to find that I did the wrong thing. Um,
Mm,
that serves the opposite of what we're looking to do, which is connection. I don't know, Brian,
yeah.
if you've had that experience or an example
Oh,
of what's shown up for you.
yeah, I think that certainly in like the coaches and the leaders I've worked with, like maybe one of the most common issues is I told this person to do this and they keep doing it wrong, or they say they're going to do this and then they don't do this, right? And like I'll ask about clarity, right? Oh yeah, I was clear, I was very direct. I've told him 3 or 4 times. And the challenge with that, like again, that's intellectual clarity. You can even write it down, right? You can have it written down and there, but the real challenge is just our understanding of how our brains interpret that data, right? We we tend to think that all words mean the same to all people. And because our brain loves to be really efficient, we tend to believe people see the world the way we do. The reality is nobody sees the world the way we do. And to some degree, and I'm not talking about like a full change in perspective or definition, but every word means something a little different to me than it does to you. So that's the first kind of big challenge in there is like we're often speaking different languages. The second challenge is, and I think just broader, like our brains are only kind of like our brains are only processing like less than 1% of the information coming in, right? Like consciously processing that. And so we have this clarity, but when somebody leaves a conversation, and this happens so often, I don't know that there's a human in the world that hasn't had a conversation and said, I said this, you said that, and both of them like complete like are convinced that it didn't happen. And so we sometimes feel like we need a video camera, right, going along the way. Well, but so all of that is to say, like, this intellectual clarity is like, yes, we have that. We think we have an agreement because we said it, versus do we have relational clarity? And relational clarity is do we know what those words mean from each person's perspective? And not the definition of the words, because we can actually have an agreement on the definition and still not be speaking the same language, because I need to know that person's experience with those words, right? So if we're going to agree on like, here's what we're going to do, if I don't know how you've done it in the past, I'm less clear about how you actually interpret what we're talking about. Yeah. I mean, it's some really easy examples of that are like, in finances, when, and I think about this in my own relationship, like, I used to say freedom, right? And, the idea of financial freedom means something completely different than it does to my wife, right? For me, it's the ability to do anything and not be told what to do. For Jamie, it's the having the wherewithal to survive anything that might happen, right? And so we're using the same word, but because of our different experiences, and that's one of those examples. Like 20 years ago, we spent years not knowing we were talking about the same thing or a different thing, but the same word rather, but from different perspectives. Relational clarity is understanding that, like, knowing the story behind, the actions, the words, the verbiage, or whatever that the other person's using, so that I can understand how they're interpreting what we're talking about, and then vice versa. And doing that gives us the ability to create a different level of clarity by asking, hey, based on your experience here, how does this play out, right? but then B, almost this ability to understand how the person is going to respond or how they're actually going to do the thing before they even do it. Yesterday, we had a really good conversation about a team I used to be on, a rugby team back when I was in college. And, we had a clear identification of like what the play was supposed to be, right? We had a single play in our rugby team, and it was back scratch, forwards out, forwards crash, backs out wide, right? Just a simple play. And our coach made us do only that play for like weeks. And the frustration was we all felt like we had intellectual clarity, right? We knew what the play was. We had run it hundreds of times. We knew what we were supposed to do. We knew what it was supposed to look like. But the coach had the sort of wherewithal, the understanding that like, yes, we can understand what we're supposed to do. But when we develop this, what I'm calling relational clarity, in this team in particular, not only did we know what was happening, we knew what each other was going to do before we did it. So like there's so much nuance that happens. Like I can outline in the game plan, here's what we're going to do, here's your job, here's your job. But when we practice that thousands and thousands of times, I know that, while it shows on the picture that you're going to go this way, that actually you go about 10% different this way, right? And the strategic advantage that relational clarity creates is just that efficiency. And I think if I think about that, that rugby team that we were on, right? We were so much less talented than most of the other groups that we were playing against. But because we had this like deep level of understanding in each other that was built through practice and through reflection. And what I mean by that is we practiced the plays and then we stopped and talked about who was where, right? And that's the sort of process that we build relational clarity on the app. That's how we teach other people to do it, not necessarily running out on the field, right? But this like, okay, what was the action? And then now I reflect on the action to where I get a much more clear understanding of what that action actually means specifically to me. And so with that part, that relational clarity isn't even just clarity with another person. That's also clarity with yourself, right? Yeah.
Actually, that's really interesting because as you were talking about that, one of the things that came to mind for me was the number of conversations that I've had with someone that I thought we were disagreeing and we were literally saying the same thing. And like the heat that I've seen like program managers and engineers get into because they're saying the same thing with a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Is developing this something that could help there?
Well, I think it's important to look at like where that heat comes from for one, through the lens of connection, right? Because like you're not listening to me is also means I'm not being heard. So there's an inner frustration in there that they don't know how to resolve because how can I say it louder? How can I say it more clear? How can I tattoo it on your head and punch you in the nose with it? Because I mean, that's kind of where it devolves into, right? But what's happening is what the person doesn't know, project manager, leader, is I've communicated these words based on my experience, right? Based on my knowledge and my experience, and let's put that like the value I bring. And so you not understanding them or you saying you understand and doing something else is actually attack on my value. That you must not trust what I'm saying, that you must not think what I've done has value, right? Like, so it's a status attack. It's that the frustration is you don't understand me, even though it comes out as, how do you not understand this? Because I'm frustrated that you don't see this and see how important it is, to see how critical it is to the mission, to see how needed it is for us to get this job done, this job that I've been doing, this job that I know, this job that I have this experience in. And so what they often don't realize is happening is it feels very much like a personal attack. And it's a personal attack because in communicating and trying to create these agreements, what we're doing is matching stories, right? Here's my experience. I need your experience to help. And in that, we're going to create a new experience. That's what an agreement is, right? That's what working together is. And so like that frustration, and it can, I mean, boy, it can start people into, just like full on yelling, full on, all different types of argument, which I'm sure you've experienced plenty. But they think that it is an intellectual shortcoming when in fact it's a relational shortcoming, right? That the more I know about, where this is coming from, and not the anger, but like where this, like you need me to do this action. Where have you done this action? Where have you seen the action done? Like, how has it looked before? Where have you had success? What is the success or the challenge you overcame before that makes you think this action is important, right? And and then the other piece, especially like with a manager or a project manager, is we create these actions for others without clarifying the value the other person brings, right? We think we know, we've done the work to know, we've seen their history, but we haven't actually engaged the source. And so, like, I just had a recent conversation last couple of weeks with a friend who walked me through, like, oh, I created this detailed plan for the team and what they were going to do, and I stayed up late and I did all this extra time, and in the back of my head, I'm saying, like, yeah, and now you have this plan that you're putting on others, that you have this whole story behind it of why it's important and where you've seen it. And now now you have to be in the mode of convincing them when, like helping them, like extracting the story from them, if you will, like, hey, we have this challenge. Where have you overcome something like this before? Like, where have you seen this before? And co-creating that plan so that the words so that the words mean something, right, to those people. So there's, if you will, fingerprints on both. That's relational clarity versus intellectual clarity, right? And don't get me wrong, we get away with intellectual clarity all the time, right? Like, I mean, it happens and it works, and it's more common because it's a boatload easier.
Yeah. Can you maybe speak to that a little more? Because it feels like the sense you said when like it's easy and it works. Like I immediately got the pit in the bottom of my stomach that says I don't really want to do the thing that I'm doing.
Hmm. What do you mean? You don't want to do the thing you're doing?
I think that idea of like having a game plan that is easy, that's been put together maybe with limited perspectives, and yet I'm being asked to carry that ball forward. It's hard for me to get invested fully in the success of that project. And I feel
Right.
like that leaves me pulling back and probably shrinking a little.
Yeah, and it's that like pulling back with your part or pulling back on trying to get other people involved in it.
Yeah, probably both.
Yeah. So both have different like responses, right? Like the natural, like when we're sort of given a plan like that and our input isn't taken. And when I say input, like it's important to define, I'm not talking about like ideas. I'm not talking about like, hey, what should we do here? The input is like, where have you seen this before? Right? So the leader, needs to understand like, okay, if I'm going to take a vehicle up into the mountains, I'm going to have a good idea of what vehicle I'm taking. Yeah. And the problem with like humans as the vehicle is they change constantly. And by constantly, I mean daily, right? And so I think I know, right, the vehicle I have, but because I haven't asked and I haven't checked in, I'm going. So this work in two forms. Number one, when you're given this plan and you're not, right, they haven't leveraged your experience, they haven't engaged you, like how have you done it before to find efficiencies, but to create this, again, relational clarity, it creates this status disequilibrium, right? Like, hey, like it kind of has this natural ability to make you feel just like a cog in a wheel. And because there's not your fingerprint in it, it sends this message that anybody could do this, right? Or rather that they believe anybody could do this, right? And when you feel like that, when you're in a job that and I've heard managers say this garbage, like, oh, we can replace you anytime. Like, good, then do it. Because when employees feel like that, it doesn't, I think there's managers that do that because they believe it is creating some like survival motivation. And it may once or twice, but survival motivation is only good if the risk of death is real, right? And so anyway, the response to it, right, as an individual, it's not complete, but it can be, identifying where you've done that before. So part of the practice of like relational clarity is on your own, right? Okay, where have I done this before? Specific to like, where have I been given plans like this, right? And been pissed off and still been successful, right? Like we overlook that. Like it's likely happened before, and how did I make the best out of it? How did I, move forward in it? But then there's the other side of like getting other people on board, and I think this is where both can kind of really like help each other, right? Like just because you were handed the plan doesn't mean you have to hand the plan the same way. Even though every part of you wants to, grab that plan and here's this shit sandwich everybody else told us we have to eat, right? Like, so who wants to bite what, right? That it's that same thing that should have happened with you can still happen with the team. Like, hey, here's what it looks like we need to do. Let's stop and kind of identify, like, what does this mean to you? Like, where have you seen this before? Right? What part of this do you see in here and see like, oh, I know how to do that because again, I've been successful at it. Or what part in here helps you think about a challenge that you've had before, right? And because that's the stimulus response part, right? Between stimulus and response is our choice. And so the new plan is the stimulus. The response is going to be predicated on where I've seen it before. And my brain is naturally going to go into where have I almost been killed by it before. And what we're really doing is saying, okay, here's a stimulus. Let's talk about where you've overcome this before, where you've done this well before, where you've worked with others before, how you've, how you've approached this successfully before, right? Or even how you've, managed to deal with this and not pull your hair out and throw the computer out the window, right? Like any part of this, like how have you, what is your experience with this is A, telling the other person their experience matters, but it's also B, helping you like make the experience not feel so foreign, right? And not feel so alone and isolating. Because if you just take it, internalize that nobody gives a shit about me, I'm just doing this, and then pass that on to others, now you're all doing it in a disconnected fashion, right? And so there is this like, even though you don't feel like it because they again gave you this crappy thing, and so you don't want to fix it for them, is the feeling, right? Building that kind of relational clarity with the people that you're trying to help, that you're tasked with helping do the project. That building that relational clarity is actually for your own, dare I say, survival, right? And I say survival because disconnection long term is what the most unhealthy thing we can do. Period. Like not kind of, like it is, right? It's my favorite joke now is given Vivek Murthy outline, you're better off being a 15 cigarette a day smoker than you are being lonely. It's like, go get some friends and some smokes, right? Just kind of balance it all out. But in here, it's not even about, like making them your friend. It's not about, and I think that's where we get tied up with connection. It's like, it's got to be, I got to make this person my friend, or I've got to have, you know what I mean? Like a deep relationship can be deep in understanding, right? It's not, like I have a lot of deep relationships that hugging is not involved. And maybe because my neurodiversity, that's my preference. But it's also like it gets categorized as touchy-feely. But when you understand it scientifically, again, I'm not going to take my car to a mechanic that isn't going to look into all the different parts before it makes a diagnosis, right? But like so many leaders and even coaches are shitty mechanics because there's so much value in making the diagnosis. We want to help so much. We want to improve. We want to help the team reach their goals. All of that is like driven in there, and we don't see that like coming up with advice or solutions or driving a certain way before we've built that relational clarity. Has leaves the kind of leaves the person with that same experience you would have if you drove your car into the mechanic and they just, heard you drive in, didn't look at the car at all and said, this will be $2,500. Here's what your issue is, right? You may every once in a while really trust someone because they have a really good background in history, right? But more often than not, somebody's going to do that and say, I know what you need. I know what, is going to solve the problem. And it's just going to piss you off because they haven't engaged in, they haven't done any diagnosis, right? And so when that happens right here, like they handed you a plan, here's how we fix the problems you made, is essentially what it says, right? And oh, by the way, we're going to tell you how to fix them. And we haven't even engaged where you fixed them before. And for a lot of people, that is, how they experience work, sadly, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think I'm going to get this, correct me if I get this sentiment wrong, but I think you said between stimulus and response, there's choice.
Yeah, so that's a Viktor Frankl quote, probably one of his more famous quotes, right? Like, and for those that don't know, Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz, right? Like in a concentration camp, and so that idea of like I control my response, right? And I like to say I influence my response. Or we have like more you study neuroscience, the more you realize where there's less and less we actually have control over, right? But yeah, that very famous like, oh, here's what happened. How am I going to respond?
Yeah.
Right.
And I like that choosing to respond in a way that engages the rest of the team that you're calling into the work in a way that you would have wanted to be called in.
Mm-hmm.
Really kind of takes the power out of the initial like disconnection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that what you're doing is making sure from your brain standpoint that you're not doing it alone. Even though, and I say that, I say alone, and people are, right? But just because we tend to think of alone as like, the hermit that's cast off and right completely by themselves. But like in this situation, and so many times I've seen this in leaders and coaches and different people where they are in the middle of a bunch of people and they are absolutely alone. They are leading the team, having meetings and conversations all day, and they are the loneliest person in the room. And they have no idea, right? They they almost wouldn't be able to articulate it as loneliness because they think loneliness is I'm out here by myself, but loneliness is right. My story doesn't matter to others. My challenges don't matter to others. And by matter, I mean like have value for them. right? It's not even that like nobody cares about me. It's what I've done is like nobody's seeking the insights from what I've done. And that, again, I think that's rooted in how we, again, understand connection and loneliness, right? Is we go through the experience alone, and we don't necessarily need somebody to say like, I care for you and all of this, even though that's beneficial. It's that we're going through our experience, and in those trials and in those successes in that experience, that what I've went through can help someone else, right? And I think, circling back to Viktor Frankl, like that's how he created one of the most popular books in the world. Is he took his experience and he presented it in a way that could have value for others. That is inherent in our DNA. Like that is the definition of connection. That my experience has value for someone else, right? And so the way of creating that for ourselves is finding, right, if you will, extracting the experience for others in a way that has value for us. In doing so, we feel less alone, but also in doing so, we help the person feel valued, not just tell them they're valued, but because we've like we're legitimately like, how have you gotten over this? And that information helps us, allows us to do something different. That's where connection happened. And I don't maybe make a shirt here, but like that can happen without a hug, right?
I would buy that shirt.
Yeah, yeah. Connecting without a hug. Yeah, yeah. Connection can happen without a hug. That's a little long. That's a little long. Yeah. It's not as good as the other. I didn't. It's in the other room. I didn't have it, but they show you the new shirts we got.
I like it.
Yeah. The what sucked the least this week, right? Or excuse me, just yeah, what sucked the least today, maybe, right? Anyway, my neighbors thought it was pretty funny. Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if I'm sure if that really clarified, the idea of intellectual clarity versus relational clarity. I think the biggest thing to think about on there is we go to intellectual clarity because we want clarity to be done. We want the agreement to like, here's the agreement, here's what we're saying, or here, like whether it's an explicit agreement, something we're writing out, or an implied agreement, something we don't necessarily talk about. We want to be like, here's what you're going to do, here's what I'm going to do, let's get out of here. And if you're working on an assembly line and an auto dealership, or an auto dealership, not a dealership, but a manufacturing shop, you might get away with that, right? But like if you're in the human capacity, right, I mean, that agreement changes every day because those definitions change every day because our experiences change all the time. And so like clarity isn't a one and done, nor is connection. And relational clarity is built just like any relationship. The moment you stop working on it is the moment it starts to break down, right? If I'm not working on the relationship, my brain is finding reasons to get out of it. Like it's just how it is, right? Because your brain, when connection isn't being created, your brain is looking out for disconnection all over the place. And it has this funny way of treating everything like disconnection. And how we create it is, again, like, anybody, like I've been married 21 years. The work stops when the relationship's done, right? Or when the work stops, the relationship, it's on its way of being done, right? And the more we understand connection that way and clarity that way, then that's what allows us, I think, to work better, right? Like that coach I had that had one play. We worked on that the whole time we had him as a coach. Just because we got to one point didn't mean we have to maintain it. We have to refine it. Well, we got a new person on the team, or we got a injury on the team, or we just went and got our butt kicked by a team, or we went and won in a team. Like all of those change our definition. Yeah. And so it requires that, like that work up front to be able to have it when we need it. Right. But I think I think why I like that idea of relational clarity versus intellectual clarity, because relational clarity reminds me like the moment I take this for granted, like I've just made things harder, slower, more challenging. I just not right now. Next week, a month, right? Like they're just, yeah. The immediacy part is, I think, maybe the hardest to really see clearly, you know. Yeah. Any of that helpful? Like speaking of relational clarity, I think we'll do a better job of getting people on here. I think we're going to start having guests we talked about, yeah, as well as the call-in piece. But I want to thank you for continuing to show up here so that we come and do this, right? Whether or not, you know, I've said all the things to make it successful, which is inviting other people to participate and that sort of thing. And I think that's really, you know, that kind of a good way to look at, you know, building relational clarity as well, right? Is that like uh, because humans are different, there's some tools that work better, just like me inviting people here is a tool that would work better. But maybe the biggest key ingredient to building relational clarity, whether that's with yourself or with your team, is showing up, right? Like it just engaging that idea, like by yourself, like here's a challenge. Let me think about where I've done it before. Let me think about, you know, like versus I just go into respond, right? And the same with your team, like, you know, I might not even know how to have the conversation, but like, hey, let's chat about this, and trying to get that conversation out of you know, just sofa opinions and right ideas and into like, you know, again, where, how, why does it matter? Why did it matter? Right. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, recreating the campfire, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an hour-ish, 50-ish
Okay.
minutes. Yeah. Hmm. That was great. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope anybody listening enjoyed it as well. This idea of relational clarity is one of the things we teach in the 2-week uh, connections essentials that we just started. One of the things we're trying to do as a company is like really I help people see the that whether you're a coach or a leader or just a concerned person, connection is the most important thing right now. Like there's nothing even close. And if you don't have like a plan or a strategy for how to build it, it's going to be exponentially harder. And it's probably going to continue just like with everybody else, like being whittled away. Right. And I think with everything that's going on right now, you know, whether that's, you know, in the market, government, AI, you know, all of this constant change and uncertainty is just this disaster recipe for disconnection, loneliness, isolation. But there are millions of us going through the same thing. And while I think a lot of people are just looking for the right answers, looking for somebody with the right opinion, what we can do with each other is just engage in each other's stories, right? Like, and that could be the story of the day. How did you get through today? Right? What is the thing you're most proud of doing this week? Right? How are you keeping your head above water and engaging the challenges? It's in those conversations, I think, that we find the answers to how to move forward. Right. And the more we do that with each other, the more do we do that with our clients and our teams. Then the more we then have that ability to do a little pause between stimulus and response. The less we feel like we're being pulled around by the world, and the more we feel like we have some control in the uncontrollable, because connection is the thing that does that. We just have to kind of start changing the way we think about connection, the way we build it, and to kind of put it in our lives the same way we would put our workout regimen or diet, right? Or the, the daily activities I do to complete my job, right? Connection is as important, if not more important than all of them, quite frankly, right? So yeah, good conversation about relational clarity. Try to build that in. Feel free to reach out to us for any, help. We'd love to see you in the next certification that's coming up in April, or the next engagement. Go to findagood.com. We made it through, Ren. Nice work. Yeah. All right. Next week, we might have guests. We might have call-in guests. We might even figure out how to stream on other platforms. But this was great. It's a good hour, I think. Beneficial. And for the 5 people that might watch it, yeah, let us know what you think. Awesome. All right. We'll end there for today and come back next week. Oh, and how do we feel here?